King Zoltar's booming laughter echoed through the opulent banquet hall as he mocked his daughter's choice in mates. "Behold, my subjects, Princess Thule, heir to the Romulan throne, has fallen for this ugly primitive creature." The royal court of Romulus fell silent. All eyes turned to Jake Foster, the lone human diplomat standing among the sea of pointed ears and emerald-skinned nobles. He stood rigid, jaw clenched, as the Romulan king's words washed over him. This was not how the peace negotiations were supposed to go. After years of interstellar conflict between Earth and the technologically superior Romulan Empire, Jake had been chosen for this mission specifically for his expertise in alien cultures. He'd spent months preparing, studying Romulan customs, mastering their complex language of subtle gestures and tonal shifts. But nothing had prepared him for Princess Thule. They'd met during preliminary discussions, stolen moments between tense debates over territory and resources. Jake found himself drawn to her sharp wit and fierce intelligence. For her part, Thule seemed fascinated by his alien perspective, his drive to find common ground between their species. What began as professional curiosity blossomed into something more. Secret meetings in the palace gardens, hushed conversations about hopes for the future, a future where their peoples could coexist. Jake knew it was risky, knew that fraternizing with the enemy's princess could jeopardize everything, but he couldn't help himself. Now, as King Zoltar's mocking words rang out, Jake realized the depth of his miscalculation. This banquet, ostensibly arranged as a gesture of goodwill toward the human delegation, was nothing more than an elaborate trap. The king had discovered their relationship and seized the opportunity to humiliate both his daughter and the entire human race in one fell swoop. Jake's fellow diplomats shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. Any response could derail the fragile peace talks and reignite hostilities. The wrong word, the wrong move, and humanity might face the full technological might of the Romulan war machine. Princess Thule sat frozen on her father's left, cheeks flushed a deep olive. Her eyes met Jake's for a brief moment, a mix of sorrow and defiance in her gaze. Then she stood abruptly, her ornate robes swirling around her. "Father," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "you shame yourself and our empire with such behavior." Without another word, she turned and strode from the hall, leaving a wake of murmurs in her path. King Zoltar's face contorted with rage. "You see?" he snarled, jabbing a finger toward Jake. "Already this human's influence corrupts her judgment, turns her against her own blood." He rose to his full height, towering over the assembled guests. "Let this be a lesson to you all. Humans are not our equals. They are barely more than animals, fit only to serve as our subjects once we inevitably conquer their pitiful world." Jake felt the weight of countless Romulan eyes upon him. In that moment, he knew that his next action could determine the fate of humanity. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he prepared to respond to the Romulan king's challenge. Jake met King Zoltar's gaze, his mind racing. The fate of humanity rested on his next words. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a sound, Ambassador Marcus Steele's hand gripped his shoulder. "Your Majesty," Steele said, his voice calm and measured, "perhaps we should adjourn for the evening. These discussions are best held with clear heads and full stomachs." King Zoltar's eyes narrowed, but after a moment he nodded curtly. "Very well. We will reconvene tomorrow." He swept from the room, his entourage following in his wake. As soon as the Romulans were out of earshot, Steele turned to Jake. "My quarters? Now." The human delegation huddled in Steele's room, faces grim. Jake stood before them, shoulders hunched. "What were you thinking?" Steele hissed, pacing the ornate chamber. "Fraternizing with the princess? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jake's teeth clenched. "I didn't intend—" "Intentions be damned," Steele cut him off. "We're here to prevent a war, not start one over some ill-advised romance." A soft chime interrupted the tense exchange. Jake's communicator lit up, displaying an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read. "It's from Princess Thule," he said, looking up at Steele. "She has information that could change everything." Steele's expression hardened. "Out with it." Jake relayed Thule's message about the hidden Romulan outpost. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If we can prove this, Steele mused, we'd have leverage, but how do we verify without being caught? As the team debated strategies, Jake's mind wandered to Thule. The hurt in her eyes as she left the banquet hall haunted him. He'd never meant to cause her pain or jeopardize the negotiations. Steele's voice snapped him back to attention. Foster, you're going to lead a team to that moon. We have contacts among the Romulan officers who can provide a cloaked shuttle. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Jake nodded, a mix of anticipation and dread churning in his stomach. As the meeting adjourned, he retreated to his quarters to prepare. The night air was crisp as Jake and his team, communications specialist Li Chen and security officer Sasha Ivanov, crept towards the waiting shuttle. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows, revealing the face of a young Romulan officer. Quickly, the Romulan whispered, ushering them inside. The shuttle's cloaking device will mask you from our sensors, but you must avoid physical detection. The shuttle hummed to life, slipping past the orbital defenses under the cover of darkness. As they approached the moon, Jake's hands tightened on the controls. A field of asteroids loomed before them, bathed in an eerie pulsating glow. Radiation belt, Lee muttered, eyes fixed on her instruments. It's playing havoc with our sensors. Jake gritted his teeth, guiding the shuttle through the treacherous obstacles. A sudden lurch sent them spinning, alarms blaring. We've been hit, Sasha reported, fingers flying over the damaged control panel. Cloaking device is fluctuating. Heart pounding, Jake managed to stabilize the craft, bringing them in for a rough landing on the moon's craggy surface. They donned protective suits and exited the shuttle, the barren landscape stretching out before them. There, Lee pointed to a distant ridge. I'm picking up energy signatures consistent with a large installation. They set off, each step a challenge in the low gravity. As they crested the ridge, Jake's breath caught in his throat. Below them sprawled a massive complex, gleaming metal structures, stark against the lunar rock. That's no outpost, Sasha whispered. That's a full-scale military base. Avoiding the perimeter sensors, they infiltrated the facility through a maintenance hatch. Inside, they moved swiftly through shadowed corridors, dodging patrols and using stolen access codes provided by Thule. In a vast hangar, they found their proof. Rows upon rows of sleek warships, clearly built for invasion. We need to warn Earth, Lee said, her face pale as she documented the fleet with her holocam. A distant alarm sounded. They'd been detected. Back to the shuttle, Jake ordered. Chen, take the evidence and go. Ivanov and I will gather more intel. Lee hesitated, then nodded, clutching the precious data as she sprinted back the way they'd come. Jake and Sasha pressed deeper into the complex, hearts racing. They reached a central command center, screens displaying star charts and invasion trajectories. As Jake downloaded the plans, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. We're out of time, Sasha hissed, weapon raised. Jake's fingers flew over the console, willing the data transfer to complete. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the whine of charging weapons. As the door began to slide open, Jake met Sasha's eyes. Whatever came next, they both knew the stakes. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, with only their wits and courage standing between peace and all-out war. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a squad of Romulan soldiers, their disruptors trained on Jake and Sasha. In that instant, Jake's finger found the execute button, initiating the data transfer. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the console began transmitting the invasion plans. Step away from the terminal, barked the lead soldier, his green skin flushed dark with anger. Jake raised his hand slowly, mind racing. He needed to buy time for the transfer to complete. We surrender, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. We're unarmed diplomats, not spies. This is all a misunderstanding. The Romulans sneered, revealing pointed teeth. Lying humans, your trickery ends now. As the soldiers advanced, Sasha's eyes darted to Jake. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. In one fluid motion, Sasha kicked over a nearby equipment rack. Sparks erupted as it crashed into the lead soldier, sending the others scrambling for cover. Jake dove for the console, snatching the data crystal just as the transfer completed. Alarms blared throughout the facility, bathing the room in pulsing red light. "Move!" Jake shouted, ducking behind a pillar as disruptor fire scorched the air around them. They sprinted down the corridor, the shouts of Romulan soldiers echoing behind them. Jake's heart pounded in his ears as they navigated the labyrinthine complex, relying on the facility schematics they'd memorized during mission prep. "There!" Sasha pointed to an emergency hatch. She slammed her palm on the release, and the door slid open with a gust of decompressing air. Jake hesitated. "What about you?" Sasha shoved him toward the opening. "I'll hold them off. Get that data to Earth." Before Jake could protest, a disruptor blast caught Sasha in the shoulder. She cried out in pain but managed to return fire, forcing the Romulans back around a corner. "Go!" she yelled through gritted teeth. With a final look at his wounded comrade, Jake ducked through the hatch. It sealed behind him, leaving him alone in a dimly lit maintenance tunnel. The muffled sounds of weapons fire faded as he sprinted toward the rendezvous point, praying Lee had made it out with the initial evidence. Jake emerged onto the moon's barren surface, the Earth hanging like a blue jewel in the starry sky. He activated his suit's propulsion system, bounding across the low-gravity landscape toward their hidden shuttle. A shadow fell over him. Jake looked up to see a Romulan patrol craft sweeping the area with searchlights. He dove behind a rocky outcropping, heart racing as the beam passed inches from his position. The craft circled once more before moving on. Jake let out a shaky breath and continued his journey, every sense on high alert. As he crested a final ridge, Jake's hopes plummeted. The shuttle lay in ruins, scorch marks marring its hull. Lee's body was sprawled nearby, her suit ruptured by disruptor fire. "No," Jake whispered, grief and despair threatening to overwhelm him. A gleam caught his eye. Lee's holocam lay a few feet from her outstretched hand, miraculously intact. Jake scooped it up, along with her sidearm. He allowed himself a moment to close Lee's eyes before scanning the horizon for options. In the distance, Jake spotted a Romulan landing pad. A sleek scout ship sat unattended, its boarding ramp extended. It was a long shot, but it might be his only chance to warn Earth of the impending invasion. Jake approached cautiously, using the rocky terrain for cover. He was nearly to the ship when a voice rang out. "Hold it right there, human." Jake spun to see General Vex emerging from behind a nearby boulder. Disruptor aimed squarely at Jake's chest. The Romulan's lips curled into a predatory smile. "I must admit I'm impressed," Vex said, circling Jake slowly. "No human has ever penetrated our defenses so deeply. It's almost a shame to kill you." Jake's mind raced, assessing his options. The scout ship was tantalizingly close, but any sudden move would mean instant death. "Why not test your skills against mine, then?" Jake said, forcing bravado into his voice. "Or are Romulans only brave when hiding behind their fancy weapons?" Vex's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Jake thought he'd miscalculated. Then the general let out a bark of laughter. "You have spirit, human. Very well, let's see how you fare in true combat." The Romulan tossed his disruptor aside and dropped into a fighting stance. Jake mirrored him, acutely aware of the differences in their physiology. Romulans were naturally stronger, with denser bones and more efficient muscles. But Jake had trained extensively in various martial arts, honing his speed and technique. They clashed in a flurry of strikes and counters. Jake ducked under a vicious roundhouse kick, retaliating with a swift jab to Vex's solar plexus. The Romulan grunted but seemed barely fazed by the blow that would have doubled over a human opponent. Vex pressed his advantage, driving Jake back with a series of lightning-fast punches. Jake's arms burned as he blocked, looking for an opening. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Vex's legs out from under him. The general hit the ground hard but rolled quickly to his feet. A predatory grin spread across his face. "Not bad, human, but you'll have to do better than that." They continued their deadly dance, trading blows that echoed across the lunar landscape. Jake's muscles screamed for relief, but he pushed through the pain, knowing that billions of lives depended on his success. A lucky strike caught Jake in the ribs, sending him stumbling backward. He collided with a control panel near the landing pad, inadvertently triggering a series of alarms. Klaxons blared as emergency systems activated throughout the base. Vex snarled in frustration, momentarily distracted by the chaos. Jake seized the opportunity, lunging forward with every ounce of strength he had left. His fist connected solidly with the Romulan's jaw, sending Vex reeling. As Jake pressed his advantage, a new sound cut through the din of alarms. The whine of engines filled the air as a Romulan shuttle swooped low over the landing pad. Jake's heart sank, thinking reinforcements had arrived. But as the shuttle's hatch opened, a familiar figure emerged. Princess Thula stood framed in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and purpose. "Jake," she called out, "we have to go now." Vex, recovering from Jake's assault, let out a roar of outrage. "Traitor!" he bellowed, charging toward the princess. Jake intercepted him, grappling with the enraged Romulan. "Thula, start the ship!" he shouted over his shoulder. As they struggled, Jake caught glimpses of Thule racing to the shuttle's controls. The engines hummed to life, growing in intensity. With a surge of desperate strength, Jake managed to flip Vex over his shoulder. The general landed hard on the lunar surface, momentarily stunned. Jake sprinted for the shuttle, leaping aboard just as it began to lift off. Thule's fingers flew over the controls, guiding the ship away from the moon's surface. Through the view screen, Jake saw Vex rise to his feet, shaking his fist in impotent rage. As they cleared the moon's orbit, Jake's moment of relief evaporated. A massive Romulan fleet hung in space before them, hundreds of warships emerging from hyperspace. Thule gasped. "They're deploying early. We have to warn Earth." Jake gripped the data crystal tightly, his mind racing. They had the evidence and the element of surprise, but it might not be enough. As Thule plotted a course for Earth, Jake knew the real battle was just beginning. The next few hours would determine the fate of two civilizations and test the strength of a love that defied the stars themselves. Jake's grip tightened on the data crystal as Thule guided their small shuttle away from the moon's surface. His relief at their narrow escape evaporated instantly as the view screen filled with a terrifying sight. Hundreds of Romulan warships materializing from hyperspace, their sleek hulls gleaming against the starry backdrop. "They're deploying early," Thule gasped, her fingers dancing across the controls. "We have to warn Earth." Jake's mind raced, assessing their dire situation. They were vastly outgunned, with no chance of outrunning the invasion fleet. But perhaps they didn't need to. An idea sparked in Jake's mind, born from years of diplomatic experience and a deep understanding of both human and Romulan psychology. "Thula," he said, leaning forward, "can this shuttle's communication array broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously?" She nodded, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Yes, but why would we—" Her eyes widened as she grasped his plan. "You want to transmit to Earth and Romulus at the same time." Jake allowed himself a grim smile. "Exactly. We expose King Zoltar's deception to everyone, including his own people. It's our best chance to stop this war before it starts." Thule's hands flew over the console, reconfiguring the communication systems. "It's risky," she warned. "The moment we start broadcasting, they'll be able to pinpoint our location." "We don't have a choice," Jake replied, inserting the data crystal into the shuttle's computer. "It's now or never." As the transmission began, the shuttle's sensors blared a warning. The Romulan fleet had detected their broadcast and was moving to intercept. On the main view screen, Jake watched as a massive flagship broke formation, its weapons ports glowing with deadly energy. "Incoming transmission," Thule announced, her voice tight with tension. The screen flickered, revealing the face of General Vex, his features twisted with rage. "You've made your last mistake, human," he snarled. "All ships, target that shuttle. I want it obliterated." The view screen erupted in a dazzling array of energy beams as the Romulan fleet opened fire. Thule's hands became a blur of motion, guiding the shuttle through the deadly barrage with a skill that left Jake in awe. The small craft rolled and dove, narrowly avoiding each blast. "Keep going," Jake urged, his eyes fixed on the transmission progress bar. "We're almost there." Thule said nothing, her entire being focused on their survival. She pushed the shuttle's maneuvering thrusters to their limits, executing a series of complex evasive patterns that would have made the most seasoned pilots envious. Just as the transmission bar reached 100%, a blinding flash filled the cockpit. The shuttle lurched violently, alarms screeching as systems failed across the board. "Direct hit," Thule reported, fighting to regain control. "Engines are offline. We're drifting." Jake's mind raced, searching for options as he watched the Romulan ships close in around them. Their shuttle was dead in space, a sitting target for the approaching fleet. In that moment of crisis, Jake's gaze fell on the life support control panel, and an idea formed. "Thule, can we reroute power from life support to create a makeshift thruster?" he asked, already moving to access the system. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in concentration as she considered the possibility. "It's possible, but risky. We'd only have a few minutes of air left." "It's better than being sitting ducks," Jake replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "Let's do it." Together, they repurposed the shuttle's life support systems, channeling the energy into a crude but functional thruster. The pursuing Romulans, caught off guard by this feat of human ingenuity, momentarily hesitated in their attack. As they worked, Jake's thoughts turned to Earth, hoping against hope that their transmission had gotten through. Little did he know that at that very moment, Ambassador Marcus Steele was presenting the damning evidence to the United Earth Council. The council chamber erupted into chaos as the full scope of the Romulan betrayal became clear. After a brief but heated debate, the decision was made. Earth would unveil its most closely guarded secret, a network of advanced orbital platforms capable of generating a powerful energy shield around the planet. Back in space, Jake and Thule's makeshift thruster sputtered to life, propelling them away from the encroaching Romulan fleet. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. General Vex, his face contorted with fury, appeared once more on their view screen. "You've merely delayed the inevitable," he growled. "Your planet will fall, and you will watch as—" Vex's tirade cut off abruptly as alarms blared across his ship. Jake and Thule watched in amazement as a shimmering energy barrier began to envelop the Earth, its iridescent surface rippling with power. "Impossible," Thule breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. The Romulan fleet's advance halted, their initial strike plans rendered useless by this unexpected development. As they scrambled to reassess, another transmission cut across all frequencies, this one originating from Romulus itself. Jake and Thule watched in stunned silence as reports flooded in of massive protests erupting across the Romulan capital. The public broadcast of King Zoltar's secret invasion plans had ignited a firestorm of controversy, with citizens taking to the streets to voice their opposition to an unprovoked war. Amidst the chaos, a new voice entered the fray. Admiral Dax, a moderate within the Romulan military hierarchy, opened a channel to both the drifting shuttle and Earth's Defense Command. "This madness must end," Dax declared, his weathered face filling the view screen. Neither side fully understood the other's capabilities or intentions. "I propose an immediate ceasefire and the opening of new peace negotiations." Jake felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered as he noticed a single Romulan battlecruiser breaking away from the main fleet, headed straight for their position. General Vex's voice crackled over the comm once more, seething with nearly unleashed rage. "This isn't over, human," he spat. "You and the traitor princess will answer for your crimes against the Empire." As Vex's battlecruiser loomed ever closer, its tractor beam locking onto their damaged shuttle, Jake exchanged a determined look with Thule. They had prevented an invasion and opened the door to a new era of understanding between their species, but their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The shuttle shuddered as it was pulled into the battlecruiser's cavernous hangar bay. Through the view screen, Jake could see rows of armed Romulan soldiers forming a perimeter around their landing zone. He reached out, taking Thule's hand in his own. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "we face it together." Thule nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and purpose. As the shuttle touched down and the hangar bay repressurized, they rose from their seats, ready to confront whatever fate awaited them beyond the airlock. The next few moments would determine not only their future, but the future of human-Romulan relations for generations to come. As the shuttle touched down in the hangar bay, Jake and Thule exchanged a silent glance. Their eyes conveyed volumes, willpower, fear, and unwavering trust. The moment the pressurization sequence completed, they sprang into action. Jake's fingers flew across the shuttle's control panel, initiating a series of rapid commands. Thule hurried to the rear compartment, prying open an access panel to reveal a tangle of wires and circuitry. "How long do we have?" Jake called over his shoulder, his eyes never leaving the screen. Thule's voice was tense as she spliced wires with practiced precision. 30 seconds? Maybe less. They'll be through that airlock the moment it's safe. Jake nodded, making the final adjustments to the shuttle's power core. He joined Thule at the access panel, their hands working in perfect synchronization as they completed the modifications. "Ready?" he asked, his finger hovering over the activation switch. Thule took a deep breath and nodded. Now or never. The airlock hissed open, and a sea of armed Romulan soldiers flooded into the hangar. Jake pressed the switch. A wave of invisible energy pulsed outward from the shuttle. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Weapons clattered to the floor as they short-circuited. Communication devices sparked and died. The ordered formation of Romulan troops dissolved into chaos. Jake and Thule burst from the shuttle, capitalizing on the confusion. Jake's fist connected with the jaw of the nearest soldier, sending him sprawling. Thule ducked under a clumsy swing, using her attacker's momentum to flip him over her shoulder. They moved as one, years of training and their newfound connection making them a formidable team. Jake's Earth Alliance combat techniques complemented Thule's Romulan martial arts perfectly. They fought their way through the disoriented crowd, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in their wake. "This way!" Thule shouted, gesturing toward a maintenance hatch. They sprinted across the hangar floor, dodging grasping hands and flailing limbs. Jake wrenched the hatch open, and they tumbled inside just as the effects of the electromagnetic pulse began to fade. The sound of angry shouts and pounding footsteps echoed behind them as they crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft. "Where are we heading?" Jake whispered as they emerged into a dimly lit corridor. Thule oriented herself quickly, her eyes darting to various markings on the walls. "The communications center is 2 decks up. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to end this madness." They moved swiftly through the ship's corridors, Thule's intimate knowledge of Romulan ship design proving invaluable. When they encountered crew members, Jake and Thule worked in tandem to neutralize them quickly and quietly. As they neared the communications center, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. General Vex's voice boomed over the intercom, filled with hardly restrained fury. "Attention all crew. The human prisoner and the traitor princess have escaped. Find them and bring them to me, alive." Jake and Thule exchanged a grim look. Their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. They reached the communications center, finding it lightly guarded in the confusion. Jake dispatched the 2 officers at the door with swift, efficient strikes, while Thule accessed the control panel. The doors slid open, revealing a vast array of screens and consoles. Thule immediately set to work, her fingers dancing across the unfamiliar human interface. "Can you do it?" Jake asked, keeping watch at the door. Thule's brow furrowed in concentration. "Yes, but it will take a few moments. I need to bypass the security protocols and open a channel to both fleets simultaneously." Jake nodded, his muscles tense as he listened for approaching footsteps. "Do what you need to do. I'll buy us some time." As Thule worked her technological magic, Jake prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He could hear the sound of booted feet drawing closer, accompanied by the crackle of energy weapons being primed. Just as the first Romulan soldiers rounded the corner, Thule called out triumphantly, "I've got it! We're broadcasting!" Jake leaped into action, engaging the approaching soldiers to give Thule the precious seconds she needed. His fists and feet became a blur as he fought to keep the Romulans at bay. Thule's voice rang out, clear and passionate, as she addressed both fleets. "Attention all ships, Romulan and human alike. We have evidence of King Zoltar's deception and warmongering. The invasion was built on lies, manipulating both our peoples into an unnecessary conflict." As she spoke, Jake found himself being pushed back into the communication center. The Romulan soldiers, initially hesitant to fire in the sensitive area, were growing bolder. Thule continued her impassioned plea for peace, her words reaching across the void of space to touch hearts and minds on both sides of the conflict. Jake fought with renewed vigor, knowing that every second he bought could mean the difference between war and peace. Suddenly, a familiar and unwelcome voice cut through the chaos. General Vex strode into view, his face a mask of cold fury. "Enough of this foolishness," he snarled, raising his weapon. "Your misguided attempt at peace ends now." Jake tensed, preparing for what could be his final stand. But before Vex could fire, something unexpected happened. One of his own officers stepped forward, placing himself between the general and his targets. "No, sir," the young Romulan said, his voice shaking but resolute. "We've heard the truth. This war is wrong." Other soldiers began to lower their weapons, the doubt clear on their faces. Vex's expression contorted with rage as he realized he was losing control of his crew. In that moment of hesitation, Jake acted. He lunged forward, disarming Vex with a swift, precise movement. The general's weapon clattered to the floor, and Jake pinned him against the wall. "It's over, Vex," Jake said firmly. "The truth is out. It's time to end this." As if to punctuate his words, Admiral Dax's voice came over the communication system, announcing the ceasefire and the commencement of peace talks. The tension in the room palpably shifted as the reality of the situation sank in. Jake and Thule shared a look of cautious hope. They had succeeded in averting immediate disaster, but the real work of building lasting peace was just beginning. As Vex was led away by his own officers, Jake and Thule turned their attention to the monumental task ahead, helping to forge a new era of cooperation between their peoples. As Vex was led away by his own officers, Jake and Thule turned their attention to the monumental task ahead, helping to forge a new era of cooperation between their species. Their moment of triumph was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the battlecruiser, and the deck beneath their feet shuddered violently. Jake stumbled, catching himself on a nearby console. Thula's eyes widened as she scanned the readouts. "He's overridden the ship's controls," she exclaimed, her fingers flying across the interface. "We're on a collision course with Admiral Dax's flagship." Jake's mind raced. "Can you stop it?" Thule shook her head, frustration etched on her face. "Not from here. We need to get to the bridge." They sprinted from the communications center, the ship's corridors now a maze of flashing red lights and panicked crew members. Jake grabbed the arm of a passing Romulan officer. "We need your help," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Your general is trying to destroy both ships. Are you with us or against us?" The officer hesitated, his gaze darting between Jake and Thule. After a moment, he nodded. "What do you need?" "Get us to the bridge," Thule commanded, "and gather anyone else willing to help." As they navigated the increasingly unstable ship, Jake marveled at how quickly their ragtag team grew. Romulans who had been their enemies mere hours ago now worked alongside them, passing on information and clearing obstacles. A violent tremor rocked the ship, sending a shower of sparks raining down on them. Jake instinctively pulled Thule close, shielding her with his body. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the universe seemed to shrink to just the two of them. "We're nearing a restricted area," one of the Romulan crew members called out, breaking the spell. Thule straightened, her royal bearing evident as she approached a security terminal. "I can handle this," she said, inputting a complex sequence of commands. The doors slid open with a hiss. As they entered the final corridor leading to the bridge, they were met with a squad of Vex's loyal soldiers. Jake stepped forward, his stance shifting subtly into a fighting posture. "Last chance," he called out. "Stand down, or we'll have to go through you." The Romulans responded by raising their weapons. Jake exploded into action, his movements a blur of precise strikes and fluid dodges. He weaved between energy blasts, closing the distance rapidly. His fist connected with the first soldier's jaw, sending him sprawling. Beside him, Thule moved with deadly grace. She struck at pressure points with pinpoint accuracy, incapacitating her opponents with minimal force. Together they carved a path through the Romulan defenders, their combined fighting styles creating a whirlwind of controlled chaos. As the last soldier fell, Jake and Thule shared a look of grim satisfaction. They had come so far, overcome so much. Now only one obstacle remained between them and averting disaster. The bridge doors loomed before them, sealed tight against intruders. Thule approached the control panel, her fingers dancing across the interface as she input her royal access codes. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a series of heavy clicks, the massive doors began to slide apart. They burst onto the bridge to find General Vex hunched over the main control console, his face contorted with manic persistence. He spun to face them, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Too late," he snarled, slamming his hand down on a glowing red button. "If I can't have victory, no one will." Alarms shrieked as the ship's computer announced the activation of the self-destruct sequence. Panic erupted among the bridge crew, many abandoning their posts and fleeing towards the escape pods. Jake launched himself at Vex, their bodies colliding with bone-jarring force. They grappled fiercely, crashing into consoles and view screens. Vex's genetically enhanced strength gave him an edge, but Jake's years of combat training allowed him to hold his own. As they fought, Thule raced to the navigation controls. Her hands flew across the unfamiliar human interface, struggling to make sense of the systems. "Jake," she called out, "I need more time." Jake grunted in acknowledgement, redoubling his efforts against Vex. He could feel his muscles straining, pushed to their limits by the superhuman Romulan. But with every blow he blocked, every counter he landed, Jake felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humans and Romulans could work together, could overcome their differences. With a burst of strength, Jake managed to pin Vex against the main view screen. The Romulan general snarled, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Why won't you just die, human?" Jake met his gaze steadily. "Because there's too much at stake," he replied, his voice low and intense. "This isn't the end for either of our people. It's a new beginning." With a precise strike, Jake rendered Vex unconscious. He turned to find Thule still working frantically at the controls, sweat beading on her brow. "How much time do we have?" he asked, moving to join her. "Seconds," she replied tersely. "I've deactivated the self-destruct, but we're still on a collision course. We need to change our vector now." Jake's mind raced, drawing on every scrap of knowledge he'd accumulated about space travel and naval tactics. "The auxiliary thrusters," he said suddenly. "If we fire them in sequence, we might be able to alter our course enough to avoid impact." Thule's eyes widened in understanding. "It's never been done on a ship this size, but," she nodded sharply, "it's our only chance." Together, they input the commands, their hands moving in perfect synchronization. The ship groaned in protest as the auxiliary thrusters fired, straining against the massive vessel's momentum. On the display, Admiral Dax's flagship loomed ever larger. Jake and Thule watched with held breath, their hearts pounding in unison as the distance between the ships dwindled. At the last possible moment, their battlecruiser began to veer off course. The flagship slipped past them, close enough that Jake could make out individual figures on its observation deck. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through both ships as the immediate danger passed. As they brought the battlecruiser to a stable position, a transmission came through. Admiral Dax's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "That was some impressive flying," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe we have much to discuss. Would you care to join us for the peace talks? As honored guests, of course." Jake and Thule exchanged a look, years of mistrust and conflict, melting away in the face of their shared triumph. Jake reached out, taking Thule's hand in his own. Together, they turned to face the view screen in the future that awaited them. "We'd be honored, Admiral," Jake replied, feeling the weight of history in his words. "I think it's time we all sat down and talked." As they prepared to leave the battlecruiser, Jake and Thule were acutely aware that their actions had set in motion changes that would reshape the relationship between humans and Romulans for generations to come. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was filled with hope. As they prepared to leave the battlecruiser, Jake and Thule were acutely aware that their actions had set in motion changes that would reshape the relationship between humans and Romulans for generations to come. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was filled with hope. The shuttle hummed to life as Jake and Thule settled into their seats. Through the viewport, Admiral Dax's flagship loomed large, its sleek lines a testament to human engineering. As they approached, Jake couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. So much rested on these peace talks. "You seem tense," Thule observed, her voice low and soothing. Jake managed a small smile, just thinking about what's at stake. Before Thule could respond, the shuttle rocked violently. Alarms blared as the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're under attack! Cloaked fighters!" Jake's mind raced, adrenaline surging through his veins. He leaned forward, scanning the seemingly empty space around them. Then he saw it, a slight shimmer, barely perceptible against the starfield. "There," he pointed. "They're using some kind of advanced cloaking technology." Thule's eyes widened in recognition. "Silax?" she breathed. "He must have stolen prototype cloaking devices from a research facility. We need to warn the flagship." Jake nodded, already moving to the communication panel. "Admiral Dax," he called, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're under attack by cloaked Romulan fighters. They're using technology that's bypassing your sensors." Admiral Dax's weathered face appeared on the screen, concern etched in every line. "Understood, Jake. We're detecting multiple impacts, but we can't get a lock on the attackers. Any suggestions?" Jake's mind flashed back to their earlier escape. "The electromagnetic pulse," he said, the plan forming as he spoke. "We can modify your defensive array to emit a pulse that will disrupt their cloaking fields." Dax's eyebrows rose, impressed. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot. Get your shuttle aboard immediately. We'll need your expertise." As they docked with the flagship, Jake and Thule sprinted towards the bridge. They passed through corridors filled with organized chaos, crew members rushing to battle stations, medics preparing for casualties. Jake caught sight of a familiar face amidst the frenzy. "Ambassador Steele," he called out. The ambassador turned, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the surrounding panic. "Jake, Princess Thule," he greeted them. "I'm coordinating the evacuation of non-essential personnel. We need to get as many people to safety as possible." Jake nodded, impressed by the ambassador's composure. "Good thinking. We're heading to the bridge to help counter the attack." As they reached the bridge, they found Admiral Dax coordinating the defense. Thule immediately moved to a nearby console, her fingers flying across the interface. "I can access the weapon systems with my royal codes," she explained. "We'll need to work quickly to integrate the pulse technology." Jake joined her, relaying instructions to the human technicians. It was a delicate dance of cooperation, human and Romulan expertise, merging to create something entirely new. As they worked, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly they came together in the face of crisis. On the main view screen, the battle unfolded. The cloaked fighters darted in and out of view, their attacks precise and devastating. But even as Jake watched, he saw opportunities, patterns in their movements, weaknesses in their formation. "Admiral," he called out, "if we coordinate with the Romulan officers who've joined us, we can predict their attack vectors. The extremists are using classic Romulan assault patterns, but they're not accounting for human defensive tactics." Dax nodded sharply. "Do it." Jake found himself at the center of an impromptu war room, Romulan officers gathered around him as he outlined his strategy. He could see the skepticism in some of their eyes, but as he spoke, explaining how human and Romulan tactics could be combined to create an unpredictable defense, that skepticism gave way to grudging respect. "Ready," Thule's voice rang out. "Electromagnetic pulses charged and ready to deploy." Jake met her eyes across the bridge, a moment of understanding passing between them. With a nod from Admiral Dax, Thule activated the pulse. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, like ghosts materializing from the void, the Romulan fighters flickered into view. The bridge erupted in a flurry of activity as gunners locked onto the now visible targets. "Direct hits on multiple enemy craft," a tactical officer reported. "They're breaking formation." A cheer went up from the crew, but Jake's relief was short-lived. A new alarm blared, and a security officer's voice came over the comm. "Intruders on board. A team of Romulan soldiers has breached the hull. They're heading for the bridge." Jake's muscles tensed, ready for action. He turned to Thula, seeing his own tenacity mirrored in her eyes. "We need to stop them," he said simply. Thule nodded, already moving toward the door. "I know the layout of these ships better than they realize. We can cut them off before they reach the bridge." As they raced through the corridors, Jake assembled a mixed team of human and Romulan security personnel. He briefed them quickly, emphasizing the need for coordination between their different fighting styles. They reached a junction just as the intruders rounded the corner. At their head was a tall, imposing Romulan with cold, calculating eyes. Commander Silax. "Traitors!" Silax snarled, his gaze fixed on Thula. "You would destroy everything our people have built." "We're saving our people," Thule retorted, her voice steady, "from an eternity of conflict and isolation." Silax's response was a vicious attack. The corridor erupted into chaos as the two groups clashed. Jake found himself at the center of the storm, his body moving on instinct, years of training guiding his every move. He ducked under a Romulan swing, using the alien's momentum to throw him into a bulkhead. A quick glance showed him that the mixed security team was holding its own, human and Romulan fighting styles blending into an effective defense. Then Silax was before him, a sneer twisting his features. "Let's see what you're made of, human," he growled. Jake settled into a fighting stance, his mind clear, focused. As Silax attacked, Jake realized the Romulan was stronger, faster, but also predictable. Jake let his body flow, adapting to Silax's style, incorporating elements of Romulan martial arts he had observed. Their fight became a brutal dance, each seeking an advantage. Jake could feel the eyes of both humans and Romulans on them, knew that this battle had become something more than just two individuals. Silax's fist grazed Jake's jaw, sending him staggering. The Romulan pressed his advantage, but Jake turned the momentum against him, using a human wrestling move to slam Silax against the wall. In that moment of impact, Jake saw something shift in Silax's eyes. Surprise, and perhaps a flicker of respect. Jake stepped back, his chest heaving, and extended a hand. "It doesn't have to end this way," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "There's a place for you in this new future we're building, for all Romulans." Silax stared at the offered hand, conflict clear on his face. The corridor was still, both sides watching, waiting. Then slowly, Silax reached out and clasped Jake's arm. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it is time for a new way." As the remaining extremists laid down their weapons, Jake felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a victory in battle, but a pivotal step towards true peace. Admiral Dax's voice came over the intercom, breaking the tension. "The attack has been repelled. All personnel, stand down and prepare for the commencement of peace talks." Jake turned to find Thule at his side, her expression a mix of pride and hope. Without a word, she took his hand, their fingers intertwining. Together, they made their way to the conference room, where representatives from Earth and Romulus were gathering. As they entered, Jake felt the eyes of both species upon them. In that moment, he realized that he and Thule had become more than just individuals. They were a symbol of what could be achieved when humans and Romulans worked together. They took their seats at the negotiation table, still hand in hand. Jake looked around at the assembled delegates, seeing a mix of caution and hope on their faces. As Admiral Dax called the meeting to order, Jake squeezed Thule's hand, drawing strength from her presence. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time, the future seemed bright with possibility. As the talks commenced, Jake leaned forward, ready to help shape a new era of interstellar cooperation. Relations. As Jake surveyed the room, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The atmosphere crackled with tension and possibility. Admiral Dax stood at the head of the table, his weathered face etched with lines of experience. "We are gathered here today to forge a new path forward," he began, his voice carrying authority and hope in equal measure. "Let us set aside our past grievances and focus on building a shared future." Jake listened intently as delegates from both sides presented their proposals. The discussions were heated at times, centuries of mistrust bubbling to the surface. But there were also moments of surprising accord, flashes of understanding that hinted at the potential for true cooperation. During a brief recess, Jake's communicator chirped urgently. He excused himself and stepped into a quiet alcove, Princess Thule following close behind. "Jake here," he answered, his brow furrowing at the encrypted message scrolling across the screen. The voice of Counselor Zhang, his mentor on Earth, came through clearly. "Jake, we've uncovered something disturbing. There's evidence of a third party manipulating both human and Romulan extremists. They're actively working to sabotage the peace process." Jake's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't even realized were there. That would explain the coordinated attacks, the advanced cloaking technology. "Exactly," Zhang confirmed. "We don't know who they are or what their endgame is, but they're a significant threat to everything we're working towards." Thule leaned in, her eyes widening as she processed the information. Jake quickly briefed her, watching as her expression shifted from shock to grit. "We need to tell Admiral Dax," she said, already moving towards the conference room. Jake nodded, following close behind. They found the Admiral in hushed conversation with a group of human and Romulan officials. As Jake approached, he caught snippets of their discussion. Something about unrest on Romulus. "Admiral," Jake interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "We have a situation." Dax turned, his eyes sharp as he took in Jake's serious expression. "What is it, son?" Jake quickly relayed the information from Earth, watching as the implications sank in. The room fell silent, the weight of this new threat settling over them all. Before anyone could respond, a Romulan aide burst into the room, his face pale. "Urgent news from Romulus," he announced, his voice shaking. "There's been a coup attempt. General Karras has seized control of the planetary defense systems." The room erupted into chaos. Romulan delegates shouted accusations, while human officials demanded explanations. Admiral Dax's voice cut through the din, calling for order. Jake's mind was already racing, piecing together a plan. He stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard above the commotion. "Admiral, delegates, please. We have an opportunity here." All eyes turned to him, a mix of curiosity and skepticism on their faces. "We're facing two interconnected threats," Jake continued, his voice steady. "The external manipulation and the internal Romulan conflict. I propose we address both simultaneously with a joint human-Romulan task force." He outlined his plan quickly, emphasizing the need for cooperation and trust. As he spoke, he could see the tension in the room slowly dissipating, replaced by a cautious sense of purpose. Admiral Dax nodded slowly, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "It's a bold plan, Jake, but it might be exactly what we need." He turned to the assembled delegates. "Does anyone object?" There was a moment of hesitation, then a chorus of agreement. Jake felt a surge of relief, tempered by the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. "Very well," Dax said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Jake, you'll lead the mission. Princess Thule, I'd like you to serve as his second in command." Jake saw a few Romulan delegates shift uncomfortably at this, but Thule's unwavering support quelled any open objections. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jake and Thule worked tirelessly to prepare their ship and crew, integrating human and Romulan technologies in ways never before attempted. They faced numerous challenges, incompatible computer systems, conflicting tactical doctrines, and the ever-present undercurrent of mistrust between their peoples. As they worked, reports from Romulus grew increasingly dire. General Karras had placed King Zoltar under house arrest and declared martial law. The Romulan fleet was mobilizing, taking up positions dangerously close to Earth-controlled space. Finally, their preparations complete, Jake stood on the bridge of their hybrid vessel. He looked around at his mixed crew, humans and Romulans working side by side, united by a common purpose. "All systems ready," Thule reported, her fingers dancing across the Romulan-designed console. Jake nodded, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the start of a mission. "Engage cloaking device," he ordered. "Set course for the Tellurian Nebula." As the ship slipped silently into warp, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The fragile peace they had worked so hard to achieve hung by a thread, and somewhere out there, An unknown enemy was pulling the strings. The Tellurian Nebula loomed before them, a swirling mass of cosmic dust and energy. Jake leaned forward, studying the sensor readings with intense focus. "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures," Thule reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Like nothing I've ever seen before." Jake made a quick decision. "Take us in closer, maintain cloak, and keep all sensors at maximum sensitivity." As they penetrated deeper into the nebula, a massive structure began to take shape on their view screen. Jake heard gasps of surprise from around the bridge. "It's a space station," he breathed, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what they were seeing. "And it's definitely not human or Romulan." Before they could investigate further, a blinding pulse of energy erupted from the station. Their ship rocked violently, alarms blaring as systems failed across the board. "We've lost cloak and propulsion," Thule shouted over the chaos. Jake gripped his command chair, his mind racing to formulate a plan. But before he could speak, the view screen flickered to life, revealing a being unlike anything he had ever encountered. "Greetings, humans and Romulans," the alien said, its voice resonating with an otherworldly timbre. "I am Zalthor of the Zinshara. You have stumbled upon something you were not meant to see." Jake stood facing the projection with as much confidence as he could muster. "We came seeking answers," he said firmly. "Who are you, and why have you been manipulating our peoples?" Zalthor's expression shifted, a mix of amusement and disdain. "Your species are but pawns in a game far beyond your comprehension. The Zinshar have guided the conflicts of lesser races for millennia. It is our purpose, our calling." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of those words sank in. He exchanged a quick glance with Thule, seeing his own perseverance reflected in her eyes. "You have a choice," Zalthor continued. "Surrender your ship and all knowledge of our existence or face obliteration." Jake's mind raced, evaluating their options. They were outgunned and crippled, but the information they possessed could change everything. He knew what he had to do. "We will never surrender," Jake declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "And we will not allow you to continue manipulating our peoples." Zalthor's eyes narrowed. "Then you have chosen your fate." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Jake turned to his crew, seeing a mix of fear and tenacity on their faces. "We need to warn Earth and Romulus," he said, his mind already formulating a plan. "And we need to find a way out of here. Any ideas?" As his team began to brainstorm, Jake met Thule's gaze. They shared a moment of silent understanding, both aware of the monumental task ahead. The fate of their peoples, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested in their hands. Hands. Jake's mind raced, calculating their options. With their ship disabled and the Zinshar preparing to attack, they needed a bold strategy. He turned to his crew, perseverance etched on his face. "We're not finished yet," he declared. "I have an idea, but it's risky." Jake quickly outlined his plan to overload the ship's power core, creating an electromagnetic pulse that could potentially disable the Zinshara station's defenses. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but nodded in agreement. "It's our best shot," Thule said, her voice steady. "I'll coordinate from the bridge while you lead the modification team." As Jake and a small group of engineers raced to the engine room, Thule set to work at her console. Her fingers flew across the controls as she composed a coded distress signal, encrypting it with a complex Romulan algorithm. "Sending message to both Admiral Dax and Romulus," she announced. "Let's hope it gets through." In the engine room, Jake and his team worked feverishly to modify the power core. Sparks flew as they rerouted circuits and bypassed safety protocols. The ship groaned around them, systems failing one by one. "We're out of time," shouted one of the engineers. "The Zinshara are powering up their weapons." Jake gritted his teeth, making a final adjustment. "Now or never," he muttered, and slammed his hand down on the activation switch. The ship lurched violently as energy surged through its systems. A blinding flash engulfed them, followed by total darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then gradually, emergency lights flickered to life. Jake tapped his communicator. "Bridge, report!" Thule's voice came through, tinged with both relief and concern. The pulse worked. The Zinshara station's shields are down. But Jake, we're in trouble. Life support is failing, and we're drifting into the nebula. Jake made his way back to the bridge, passing crew members working frantically to stabilize the ship. As he entered, he saw the massive Zinshara station on the interface, its once impenetrable defenses now dark and vulnerable. Before they could celebrate their small victory, alarms blared throughout the ship. "Nebula gases detected," reported a sensor officer. "Hull integrity compromising." Jake and Thule shared a look of fierce dedication. They had struck a blow against the Zinshara, but at a terrible cost. As they prepared for the worst, a new voice crackled over the communication system. "This is Admiral Dax to the Joint Task Force. We're here to assist. Hold on." The view screen lit up as the Admiral's flagship dropped out of warp, followed by a flotilla of human and Romulan vessels. The bridge crew cheered as the reinforcements engaged the weakened Zinshara station. "Incoming transmission from Romulus," Thule announced, surprise evident in her voice. "It's General Karras." The general's face appeared on screen, his expression a mix of perseverance and grudging respect. "Your message was received, Princess Thule. The Romulan fleet stands ready to defend against this common enemy." As the battle raged outside, a Romulan rescue team boarded the damaged ship. Human and Romulan crew members worked side by side, their former mistrust forgotten in the face of shared danger. Jake watched with pride as they rerouted power, sealed hull breaches, and stabilized life support. Admiral Dax's voice came through once more. "The Zinshara station is critically damaged. Prepare to deliver the final blow." Jake stepped forward, an idea forming. "Wait, Admiral. What if we captured the station instead? Think of the scientific advancements we could make with their technology." There was a pause, then Dax replied, "A bold suggestion, Jake, but it could work. Assemble a boarding party immediately." Jake turned to Thule. "Are you with me?" She nodded, a fierce grin on her face. "Always." As they prepared to board the Zinshara station, Jake addressed the combined human and Romulan forces. "Today, we fight not just for our own peoples, but for the freedom of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Together, we will end the Zinshara's manipulation and forge a new future of cooperation." The boarding shuttle launched, carrying Jake, Thule, and a diverse team of specialists towards the massive alien structure. As they approached, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the scale of the station and the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "Remember," he said to his team, "our goal is to secure the station and capture any surviving Zinshara. We need their knowledge to understand the full scope of their actions and to prevent this from ever happening again." The shuttle docked with a shudder, and the boarding party moved out. They encountered sporadic resistance from automated defenses, but the electromagnetic pulse had done its work well. Most systems were offline or malfunctioning. As they pushed deeper into the station, Jake and Thule found themselves working in perfect synchronization. His quick thinking complemented her tactical precision, allowing them to overcome obstacles that would have stopped either of them alone. Finally, they reached the central control room. The doors slid open to reveal a lone figure, standing amidst a sea of dormant consoles. The alien was tall and imposing, with multiple limbs and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. "I am Zelthoris," the being announced, its voice resonating through the chamber. "Last of the Zinshara, you have come far, humans and Romulans, perhaps too far." Jake stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We've come to end your manipulation of our peoples," he said firmly. "But we're also here to understand. Why have you done this? What purpose does it serve?" Zelthoris regarded them with an unreadable expression. "For millennia, we have guided the conflicts of lesser races. It is through struggle that species evolve, that they reach their true potential." Thule spoke up, her voice sharp. "And who gave you the right to make that decision for us, to play with our lives and our futures?" The alien's eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty crossing its features. Jake seized the moment, pressing their advantage. "Look at us," he urged, gesturing to the mixed human-Romulan team behind him. "We've achieved more through cooperation in these past hours than we have in centuries of conflict. Imagine what we could accomplish if we worked together, free from manipulation. Zelthoris was silent for a long moment, its gaze moving from Jake to Thula and back again. Finally it spoke. Perhaps we have been wrong. The Zinshara have watched the galaxy for so long, we had forgotten how to see. Jake felt a surge of hope. Then help us, he said. Share your knowledge with us. Let us learn from your mistakes and build a better future together. The alien nodded slowly. Very well. The Zinshara will interfere no more. But be warned, the path you have chosen will not be an easy one. As Zelthoris began to power down the station's remaining systems, Jake and Thule shared a look of triumph and relief. They had done it. They had not only saved their peoples from manipulation, but had opened the door to a new era of interstellar cooperation. But as they watched human and Romulan ships begin to secure the Zinshara station, both knew that their work was nowhere near the end. The real challenge lay ahead, building a lasting peace between their two species and navigating the complex political landscape that awaited them. Jake took Thule's hand, drawing strength from her presence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the human and Romulan ships secured the Zinshara station, Jake and Thule knew their journey was not nearly finished. The real challenge lay in navigating the complex political landscape that awaited them back home. Weeks later, their ship entered Romulan space, escorted by a mixed fleet of human and Romulan vessels. As they approached the homeworld, Jake felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He turned to Thule, who stood beside him on the bridge. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. Thule nodded, her eyes fixed on the growing image of her home planet. "We've faced worse," she replied with a slight smile. As their ship descended through the atmosphere, Jake marveled at the sight below. The capital city sprawled out before them, its architecture a blend of sharp angles and sweeping curves. But what truly caught his attention were the crowds gathering in the streets and plazas. The shuttle touched down in the main square, its doors hissing open to reveal a scene Jake never thought he'd witness. Romulans and humans stood side by side, their cheers rising in a cacophony of welcome. Banners in both languages fluttered in the warm breeze, proclaiming messages of peace and unity. Jake and Thule stepped out, hand in hand, to face the crowd. The roar intensified, and Jake felt a surge of emotion. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything to achieve. As they made their way through the throng, Jake caught snippets of conversation in both Romulan and English. Humans and Romulans alike reached out to touch them, to offer words of gratitude and admiration. It was a far cry from the hostility that had defined their relationship for so long. The procession led them to the royal palace, its imposing facade now adorned with the flags of both Earth and Romulus. As they approached the grand entrance, Jake felt Thule's hand tighten around his. He knew what awaited them inside. The throne room was a study in contrasts. Ancient Romulan tapestries hung alongside newly installed view screens displaying Earth's major cities. The room was filled with dignitaries from both worlds, their chatter falling silent as Jake and Thule entered. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne that seemed slightly less grandiose than Jake remembered, was King Zoltar. The king's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as he watched them approach. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. As they reached the foot of the throne, he bowed respectfully, noting with satisfaction that he executed the Romulan gesture flawlessly. "Your Majesty," Jake began, his voice clear and steady, "we come before you not just as representatives of Earth, but as advocates for a new era of cooperation between our peoples." King Zoltar's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, allowing Jake to continue. Jake launched into his prepared speech, outlining their proposal for human-Romulan collaboration. He spoke of joint scientific ventures to study the Zinshara technology, cultural exchange programs to foster understanding, and economic partnerships to benefit both worlds. As he spoke, Jake noticed a subtle shift in the king's demeanor. The hard lines around Zoltar's mouth softened, and a glimmer of interest appeared in his eyes. When Jake finished, the room held its breath, waiting for the king's response. Slowly, deliberately, King Zoltar rose from his throne. He descended the steps, his gaze never leaving Jake's face. The king stood before them, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Jake and Thule. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he said nothing. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, King Zoltar extended his hand in the traditional Romulan gesture of respect. "You have proven me wrong, Jake of Earth," the king said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Your actions have demonstrated the strength and nobility of the human species. Perhaps it is time for old prejudices to be set aside." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Jake accepted the gesture, his heart pounding with the magnitude of the moment. Thule, seizing the opportunity, stepped forward. "Father," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "let us formalize this new alliance. I propose a union between our worlds, sealed by my marriage to Jake." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and excited whispers. King Zoltar's eyebrows rose, and for a moment Jake feared they had overreached. But then, incredibly, the king's face softened into a smile. "My daughter," he said, placing a hand on Thule's shoulder, "your courage and vision never cease to amaze me. If this is truly your wish, and if Jake is willing, then you have my blessing." Jake felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He looked at Thule, saw the love and grit in her eyes, and knew his answer. "It would be my honor," he said, taking her hand. As news of the impending royal wedding spread through the palace and beyond, Jake and Thule found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Delegations from Earth and Romulus converged, eager to begin planning an event that would symbolize the new era of peace. In the days that followed, Jake watched in amazement as the capital transformed. Streets once patrolled by stern-faced guards now bustled with mixed groups of humans and Romulans, all working together to prepare for the celebration. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Jake turned to Thule. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" he asked, gesturing to the scene below. Thule shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. "No," she admitted, "but I'm glad we get to see it together." As the sun set over the Romulan capital, casting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jake and Thule stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges their new future might bring. The wedding was only the beginning of their journey, a symbol of hope for two worlds learning to trust and understand each other after centuries of conflict.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.